It was one of those quiet nights in New York City when the lights of the tall buildings shimmered through the glass walls of Alexander Knight's penthouse. The city never slept, but Alexander, billionaire, investor, and philanthropist, often did. His days were consumed with meetings, numbers, and expectations. He was known for his precision, for his control, and for never letting emotions cloud his judgment. But that night was different. He had returned early from a charity gala, exhausted and irritated by the fake smiles and meaningless conversations. The sound of rain outside filled the silence as he loosened his tie and placed his watch on the marble counter. As he walked toward the kitchen for a glass of water, he noticed something strange, a faint light flickering under the kitchen door. It was nearly midnight. No one should have been there, curious. He stepped closer. The moment he pushed open the door, he froze. There, sitting on the cold tiled floor beside the trash bin, was his maid, Lila. She was eating something hurriedly from a small plate. Her hands trembled, her eyes wide with fear as she looked up and saw him standing in the doorway. Alexander's deep voice broke the silence. "What are you doing here, Lila?" Her body stiffened. She quickly wiped her mouth with the back of her hand, trying to hide the food behind her. I'm sorry, sir," she whispered. "I didn't mean, I was just—" He stepped closer, his face expressionless but his tone sharp. "Are you eating leftovers from the trash?" Lila's lips quivered. She couldn't find the courage to speak. Tears welled in her eyes. "I didn't want to waste it, sir. It was still good food. I thought no one would notice for a moment." There was only silence between them. The billionaire standing tall in his perfectly tailored suit, and the fragile young woman sitting on the floor, clutching a piece of bread like it was the most precious thing in the world. Alexander sighed and turned away. "You know there's food in the pantry. You could have asked the chef." She hesitated, lowering her gaze. "I'm not allowed to, sir. The chef said the meals are only for the staff during lunch hours. I didn't want to get anyone in trouble." Her voice cracked. "I just didn't eat anything since morning." Alexander froze. He turned back slowly, staring at her. "You haven't eaten since morning?" She shook her head softly. "There was no breakfast left, and I didn't have enough money to buy anything outside." For a brief second, something inside him shifted. He wanted to say something, maybe comfort her, maybe offer her food, but years of living behind walls of pride and power had made him cold. So instead, he simply said, "Go to your room, Lila. We'll talk in the morning." Lila nodded quickly, wiping her tears with the sleeve of her worn-out uniform. She stood up, bowed slightly, and walked out quietly. The soft echo of her footsteps faded down the hallway, leaving Alexander alone with his thoughts. That night he couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her face, scared, tired, and hungry. He remembered the way her hands shook as she held that tiny piece of bread. The image haunted him. At 3 a.m., he got out of bed, walked back to the kitchen, and opened the fridge. It was filled with food. Expensive cheeses, fruits, and gourmet dishes from the gala that no one even touched. He leaned against the counter, whispering to himself, "How did I become this man?" Lila, meanwhile, sat quietly in her small servant room at the far end of the penthouse. The room was barely larger than a storage closet, with a single bed and a flickering bulb. She held a small photograph of a little boy in her hands. Her son, Arvin. He was 6 years old, living in a small village miles away with her mother. Lila had come to the city to earn money for his schooling, but most of her salary went toward rent and medical bills for her sick mother. Every night, she saved the little she could. Every night she reminded herself that this sacrifice would one day pay off, but that night shame crushed her heart. She never wanted her employer to see her like that, weak, hungry, desperate. She had worked hard to stay invisible, to clean quietly, to smile politely, to never cause trouble, and now, he had seen her at her lowest. Tears rolled down her cheeks as she whispered, "I just wanted to eat." The next morning, Lila woke up early, as always. She cleaned the living room, dusted the furniture, and prepared the breakfast table before anyone else arrived. She kept her eyes low, hoping Alexander wouldn't mention last night. But when he entered the room, something was different. He didn't look angry. Instead, there was a quietness in his eyes, a kind she hadn't seen before. He sat at the table, sipping his black coffee in silence. After a few minutes, he said softly, "Lila, come here." Her heart pounded. She stepped closer, hands clasped tightly in front of her. "I'm sorry about last night," he said. "You shouldn't have to hide just to eat. From now on, you'll have access to all meals in this house whenever you need." Her eyes widened in disbelief. "Sir, I didn't mean to—" He raised his hand gently. "It's fine. You're not in trouble." Something about his tone felt genuine. It wasn't the cold, commanding voice she was used to hearing. It was human. For the first time, she saw the man behind the wealth, the one who carried loneliness behind his eyes. "Thank you, sir," she whispered. He nodded and went back to his coffee. But when she turned away, he said quietly, "Lila, have breakfast with me." She froze. "Sir?" He looked up. "Sit down, eat." Lila hesitated, unsure if it was a test. But when she saw the faint smile on his face, she slowly sat at the edge of the table. The chef brought fresh omelets, toast, and fruit juice. It was the first real breakfast she had in weeks. As she took her first bite, tears filled her eyes. Alexander noticed but said nothing. For him, it was a simple gesture. For her, it was everything. Later that day, Alexander couldn't focus on his work. He sat in his office, staring at the skyline, lost in thought. He had built empires, earned billions, yet in all his success, he had never noticed the people around him, the ones who quietly kept his world running. He called his personal assistant. "James," he said, "how many employees live on site?" "About 12, sir," James replied. "And do they have proper meals and accommodation?" James hesitated. "I believe so, sir, though some of the lower staff share rooms." "Fix that," Alexander said immediately. "I want everyone treated with respect." "Starting today?" James blinked in surprise. "Of course, sir." When the call ended, Alexander leaned back and sighed. Something about that one moment with Lila had awakened a part of him he'd long buried, the part that cared. That evening, Lila finished her chores and was about to head to her room when Alexander called her again. "Lila," he said, "do you have family?" She nodded softly. "Yes, sir. My mother and my little boy. He's 6. He studied her face, noticing the softness in her eyes when she spoke of her son. "And you send money to them?" "Yes, sir. Almost everything I earn." There was silence. Then he asked, "Do you ever see him?" She smiled faintly. "Only once a year. On his birthday. I wish I could see him more." Alexander felt a strange ache in his chest. He had everything, cars, luxury, status, but no one to share it with. Not even family. His parents had passed away years ago and he never married. He suddenly realized how empty his house was despite all its grandeur. "You must miss him," he said quietly. "Every day," Lila whispered. Alexander looked away, his voice barely audible. "I think I understand that." Later that night, as rain began to fall again, Lila stood near the window of the staff quarters, watching the city lights flicker in the distance. She thought about her son, about home, and about the strange kindness her boss had shown that morning. Maybe, just maybe, there was still goodness left in the world. But what she didn't know was that Alexander had already started digging into her background, not out of suspicion but curiosity. He had asked his assistant to gather information about her village, her family, and her struggles. He didn't know why, but he felt a connection to her story, one that would soon change both their lives forever. And as the thunder rolled outside, Alexander whispered to himself, "This world breaks people in different ways. Maybe I can fix at least one." The following days in Alexander Knight's mansion felt different. For the first time, the cold marble floors and silent hallways carried warmth. Lila noticed it in the smallest details. How breakfast leftovers were now wrapped neatly for the staff. How every meal was enough for everyone. And how the atmosphere felt a little more humane. But she also noticed something else. Alexander's eyes often followed her quietly, as though he was trying to understand something about her he couldn't explain. He wasn't the same distant man she'd known. His voice had softened. He greeted her. Sometimes he even smiled, and that made her nervous, because kindness, she had learned, was often temporary. A painful past that evening after finishing her chores, Lila went to her room and pulled out a small wooden box from under her bed. Inside it were 3 things: an old photograph of her son, a crumpled school admission form, and a letter from her mother. The letter was faded from being read too many times. "My dear Lila, Arvin's fever is better now. Don't worry too much. He misses you. He keeps asking when you'll come home. I tell him you're working hard so he can have a better future. Take care of yourself, my child. Eat when you can. Don't skip meals. Love, Mama. Lila closed her eyes as tears slipped down her cheeks. Eat when you can, her mother had written. She smiled sadly. She didn't even have enough to eat the night before Alexander had caught her. Every penny she earned went home. She never bought new clothes, never indulged. Her dream was simple, to save enough money to bring her son to the city and get him into a good school. But life in the mansion wasn't easy. Some of the senior staff looked down on her because she was new and quiet. The chef disliked her for being too slow, and others mocked her small-town accent. Still, she endured. Until one night, everything changed again. The accident, it was late, close to midnight, when Alexander's voice echoed through the hallways. Lila. She rushed out of her small room, frightened. His tone was not angry, but anxious. When she reached the living room, she found him sitting on the floor beside an overturned glass. A dark stain spread across the rug, red wine. But that wasn't what caught her attention. Alexander was clutching his chest. His face pale, his breathing shallow. Sir, she cried, running to his side. Call James, he gasped, but the intercom wasn't working. Without hesitation, Lila grabbed her phone and called the emergency number, her hands shaking as she explained the situation. Within minutes, paramedics arrived and rushed him to the hospital. Lila followed, refusing to leave his side even when other staff hesitated. At the hospital, she sat outside the emergency room for hours, praying silently. Her uniform was still stained with wine and dust, but she didn't care. When James arrived, he looked surprised to see her there. You should go home, he said softly. We'll take care of him. But Lila shook her head. He was alone. Someone should stay. James sighed and nodded. Hours later, the doctor stepped out. He's stable now. It was stress and exhaustion. He'll need rest. Relief washed over her. She thanked the doctor and sat back in the cold hallway, tears of gratitude falling silently. When Alexander woke up the next morning, the first face he saw wasn't his assistant's or his lawyer's, it was hers. Lila sat by his bed, her head resting against her arms, fast asleep in the chair. For a long moment, Alexander simply looked at her. The maid who had found him collapsed, who didn't leave his side all night. Something stirred in his heart, something unfamiliar. Compassion, he whispered. You stayed? Lila woke up instantly, flustered. Yes, sir. I didn't want you to be alone. He smiled faintly. No one ever does that for me. New bonds after his discharge, Alexander was ordered to rest at home for 2 weeks. During that time, he refused external staff and insisted that only Lila assist him. At first, she was hesitant. The idea of personally serving her boss made her uneasy. But he insisted gently. Lila, please. I trust you. That simple sentence broke something inside her. No one had ever said those words to her before. She began to help him with meals, medicines, and short walks around the garden. He, in turn, began to ask about her life. What's your son's name again? He asked one morning as they sat in the sunlit balcony. Arvin, she said, smiling softly. He's 6. Very clever. He loves drawing airplanes. Alexander chuckled. Airplanes, huh? Maybe one day he'll build one. Maybe, she whispered. He looked at her, the way her eyes glowed with pride when she spoke of her child. He envied that kind of love, pure, unconditional, selfless. Does he know what you do here? He asked. Lila nodded. He thinks I work in a big house with shiny floor, she said, laughing softly. I don't tell him I'm a maid. He's too young to understand. I just want him to think his mother is working hard for him. Alexander looked away, feeling a lump form in his throat. He had spent his entire life building wealth to impress the world, but here was a woman working quietly for her child's future, and she carried more strength in her smile than he did in his empire. The secret gift a week later. Alexander called his assistant, James, find out how much it costs to enroll a child named Arvin Mendoza in a good school near his hometown, and arrange for it anonymously. James blinked. Sir, you want to pay for her son's education? Don't tell her, Alexander said. Just make it happen. Within a few days, Arvin was admitted to one of the best local schools, tuition fully paid for 5 years. Lila received a call from her mother. Joyful, tearful news. Lila. Her mother cried over the phone. An angel paid for Arvin's school. They said a donor sponsored him completely. Lila gasped. What? Who? They didn't tell us. But thank God, my child. Your prayers have been answered. Lila fell to her knees, crying with gratitude. Thank you, Lord. When she told Alexander about it later, he only smiled faintly, pretending to be surprised. That's wonderful news, he said softly. The world still has kind people, doesn't it? Yes, she whispered, smiling through tears. It does, but deep down he felt something warm inside, a quiet joy he hadn't felt in years. A harsh rumor, but happiness never lasts long in a house filled with envy. One of the senior maids, Clara, had noticed how Alexander treated Lila differently, how he spoke gently to her, how he sometimes had breakfast with her in the garden. Whispers started spreading among the staff. He's falling for the maid, they said mockingly. One afternoon, Clara decided to warn him. Sir, she said as he was reviewing papers in his study, forgive me for speaking out of turn, but people are talking. About you and Lila. Alexander's expression hardened. Talking? What do you mean? They're saying she's taking advantage of your kindness. That she's manipulating you. The words hit him like ice. That's absurd, he said sharply, but Clara shrugged. It's what people are saying. I just thought you should know. Later that day, Lila noticed the change. Alexander grew distant again, his voice shorter, his eyes colder. When she tried to speak to him, he said only, You can go now, Lila, I'll manage. Her heart sank. She didn't understand what she had done wrong, the confrontation. That night she knocked softly on his study door. Sir, may I speak with you? He looked up from his desk. What is it? Her hands trembled as she said, Have I done something wrong? He sighed. No, Lila, just give me some space. Is it because of what people are saying? She asked quietly. Alexander's eyes flickered with surprise. You heard? Yes, sir. I'm not blind. They whisper behind my back. Her voice cracked. But I swear, sir, I never... I know, he interrupted. She looked at him with tears in her eyes. Then why are you treating me like this? He looked away, conflicted. Because I don't want to make your life harder. People talk. They twist things. He exhaled deeply. I'm protecting you. Her voice was barely a whisper. Sometimes protection feels like punishment. He froze. For the first time, he realized how much his silence hurt her. How his distance made her feel smaller. But before he could respond, Lila turned and left the room, her tears falling freely. The letter, the next morning, Alexander received a note on his desk, written in Lila's delicate handwriting. Sir, thank you for everything you've done for me. For the kindness, for the food, for the small moments of care I'll never forget. But I think it's time I leave. I didn't come here to cause you trouble or shame. Please tell James I'll collect my things by tonight. Lila. He stared at the note for a long time, unable to breathe. For the first time in years, the powerful billionaire felt helpless. He wanted to stop her, to explain, to tell her how much she had unknowingly changed his life, but he didn't know how. He sat alone in his office until the sun went down, the note still in his hand. When he finally went to find her, her room was empty, her uniform neatly folded on the bed, her photograph of Arvin gone, her scent, faint, but there. And on the table, a single plate of untouched food, leftovers. Alexander sat on the edge of her bed, his heart heavy. For the first time, the house that once echoed with silence now felt suffocating. He whispered into the emptiness, Lila, you didn't take advantage of me. You healed me. As he looked around the small room, he noticed something on the windowsill, a tiny wooden carving of a heart, rough but sincere. She had probably made it for her son. He picked it up gently, holding it to his chest. For the first time in years, Alexander Knight cried.